right, thank you. We will call to order the meeting of the Policy and Finance Committee, scheduled to meet today at 3:30 for January 8th. And we have to first approve the minutes from May 19th, 2014. Has everybody had a chance to look over the minutes?
Yes.
Is there a motion?
I move to approve the minutes.
I'll second.
Moved and seconded. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion passes and the minutes are approved. Now on to number 3, discussion and possible action, a charter ordinance introduced by Councilmember Nathan Schmidt amending City of Topeka Code Section A2 through 21 and A2 through 22 concerning election of council members. I'll turn it over to you.
This is a presentation, or this was a recommendation that came out of the board put together under statute every 10 years to review the form of government in the city. They recommended, based on testimony that they received and through their deliberations, that we incorporate some form of a at-large aspect into the city council. Their recommendation was that we go with a form that would allow for district representation to maintain the districts, thus not needing to redraw the lines, and would allow primary elections to nominate the top 2 positions from each district with the continuing requirements that they reside in that district at the time of the election. And then the primary election would then be, like several of the school boards in the area do, would be an at-large vote of all of the people in the city. The point of this was to present a plan that would require council members to be more accountable to the city as a whole rather than to their own districts. This was the method that they came up with, and I agreed to sponsor, and that's where we're at.
Okay. Do you have anything to?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I think if anybody followed the meeting the night that we discussed this, it was pretty much evident that it was not probably going to pass. So I made the motion to refer it to committee because I really believe in the committee process, that we need to debate things, the good and the bad of everything, and see what we can come from this. I think that every 10-year review of our city's government is necessary, and it needs to be done. But I also heard Councilwoman De La Isla ask the question about whether or not we could put options on the ballot for the citizens to vote on. And from what I understood that evening from legal, that was not possible. So I think we need to further study that issue, that rather than debate whether or not the council agrees with this and then it goes on the ballot and the citizens go with one option, is there a possibility that we could put a couple options on the ballot? Because if we just keep the same number of districts, we've not really, I think what came out of a lot of the meetings was that we need a smaller number, but people don't want to give up their district representation. So I don't know if we have legal here that we can ask that question to find out if we can pursue something that would go on the ballot that would be several options of a vote maybe for the future, you know, that in 2020, this is what we would have.
Well, if you're going to change district lines, that will be an involved process,
Right.
because they're based upon the ward and precincts that are determined by the election commissioner.
Okay.
So that would take a while to figure out how many districts do you want, how many districts should be at large. That would take a little bit of time, and certainly not in time for the April election.
So what would be the proper process to determine how we go about looking at that. I mean, the options of putting, number of districts, redrawing the lines, that type of thing.
Well,
Go ahead.
Sure.
We already have a process for redistricting, I believe, right? Every 10
Correct.
years.
Correct, after the census.
And we just redistricted 2 years ago?
Correct, 2012,
Okay, I just wanted to
Yes.
So we
clarify
could tie into the next census
to,
to look at the redistricting, if we're gonna have to redraw the lines anyway.
yes,
Okay,
but not till 2022.
2022, okay. Oh,
Yes,
okay.
but you all have to decide what you want so that you can present it to the voters. So if you want to do some at-larges, in other words, it comes from you.
Okay.
It's not a smorgasbord for the voters to decide.
Okay,
I think the question that Councilwoman De La Isla brought up was that we can't put multiple options on the ballot, as in going this way where we would not have to redraw districts as option A, option B being 6 districts and 3 at-large, option C being retain the current format. We can't put a ballot initiative or a ballot question together like that
That's
legally.
correct.
Is that correct? It has to be a
Something
yes
very
or no.
specific, yes.
Okay. And also, if we were to amend this to say 6 districts and 3 at-large, we wouldn't have to redraw those lines before putting it on a ballot, would we? I mean, we don't have to have a ballot measure to redraw. I was on the redistricting committee 2 years ago. We don't have to have a ballot measure to approve those. Anyway, we
That's
could just say that, correct?
Yes, and we could have a delayed implementation time to
Mhm.
give time to redraw the district lines and work with the election commissioner, but the concept could be approved at the April election.
Okay.
But people may want to know what the details are, what the
Mhm.
precincts are going to be.
Any other questions? I think we have public comment from Orion Jordan. If you'd like to come up, Mr. Jordan.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm Orion Jordan. I promised to be brief. I wanted to present 2 additional pieces of information that were not included in the Citizens Governmental Review Committee report. Now, as I said, am going to be brief. I'm not going to read all of these numbers to you, if I may
Go ahead.
hand these out.
Thank you.
I'm going to ask you to read all of those right now. But as introduction to the data I just gave you, first of all, I want to say those advocating citywide at-large elections are doing so with the best of intentions. That's understood. However, citywide elections inherently give a political advantage to some parts of the city at the expense of other parts of the city. This is not on purpose, but citywide elections inherently put certain neighborhoods at a disadvantage. This, of course, occurs because some neighborhoods register to vote and turn out to vote at much higher rates than other parts of the city. For example, Potwin has a lot higher voter registration and turnout rate than Tennessee Town or Highcrest. Now, the data that I just gave you shows that at the last election, 51% of the vote came from the 36% of the population that is concentrated in the west and southwest part of Topeka. Now, I didn't bring my big map with you, but I think all of you are familiar with the wards and precincts that are listed on that first sheet. And I drew my data from the election office and from the city's GIA office to get the population numbers for each precinct in the ward. It is recognized that in the charter ordinance that we're looking at today, the 2-tiered system does give some balance to geographical diversity, because it says the primary election would be restricted to electors in that district. However, when it comes to cultural economic and racial diversity, the scales, a citywide election weakens the opportunity for that to occur. So just saying we're going to have some people coming from each part of town, and then once you go to citywide elections, then the scales get tilted in terms of trying to guarantee the best economic, cultural, and racial diversity on the council, which is the purpose of the district elections. The second item I wanted to give you is a court case. I'm not going to read all of this, but I did give that to you. This is a court case filed by the ACLU, and it's the Missouri State Conference, the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, against the Ferguson Fluorescent School District in St. Louis County Board of Election Commissioners. And just the first paragraph, if you read the first paragraph of the introduction, it says this lawsuit is a challenge to at-large election system utilized by the Ferguson School Board District to elect members to its school board, and seeks to replace it with a system in which school board members are each elected from single-member districts. The current at-large scheme impermissibly denies African American voters an equal opportunity to participate in the political process and to elect representatives of their choice. Now, I know that this court case is in Ferguson, and I'm not presenting this court case to be dramatic or melodramatic. I'm just presenting this to demonstrate that the type of analysis I'm talking about in terms of voter turnout and voter registration is a real issue. It's not some arcane topic for a political science text. It's the impact that an election system has on various neighborhoods in our city is a legitimate issue to be looked at. And this type of analysis was not central to this Citizens Governmental Review Committee. Okay, there were a couple of comments in there from people gave some testimony saying, well, we had citywide elections before, and most of the people came from Southwest Topeka. That testimony was given. I'll close just with one observation. I know that I just want to say the types of issues that we put on the ballot say something about us. Each of you have some issues that if somebody says, if I came to you and says, gosh, would you vote to put this on the ballot? You would say, well, Ryan, I'm not going to touch that with a 10-foot pole, because you just feel it's not a benefit to the city. And I'm asking you to consider that, and I know that sometimes comfort is drawn from saying, well, I'm just putting it on the ballot. We're just going to let them decide. Well, I'm sure each of you have items that you would not put on the ballot and draw any comfort going back to your constituency saying, oh, well, I just wanted to put it on the ballot. So I hope that was brief enough. I know I took probably more than the 4 or 5 minutes than I should have.
You're fine, Mr. Orion.
But I appreciate your...
If I may, it's interesting that you brought the Ferguson case, because after the meeting where we voted to send this to committee, I had that thought that when you have communities that aren't represented well in government, then you start to have civil unrest.
Yeah.
Obviously, there's impetus. There were things that happened that created the situation in Ferguson. But when people feel that their voices are not being heard, then the next step is to protest, is to speak out, is to stand up. And so you can create in a situation like Ferguson by limiting the access that people have to their elected officials.
Yeah.
And I think you're seeing that as that whole
Yes.
scenario is playing out. I
Yeah,
think it's
the-
a really good example.
Ferguson is deep and wide. It's not just one officer and
Yeah.
one shooting. There was an interesting rally at the African American church the other day that the chief of police was there, the new chief of police, several ministers. And the point they made was that we have to look at things in context, that addressing the broader social issues shouldn't be dumped on the police department. That's our responsibility as citizens
Yeah.
to address those issues. And that's why I submit the request that you consider the information that I presented today.
Well, thank you very much for your questions.
Yes, the Ferguson School Board, if I'm reading this correctly, doesn't have districts at all. All of the election, both the primary and the general, are at large. There are no district representation.
Yes, just like the city just like the city council used to be, or the city commission used to be. It was all, and that's why I brought up the point that I do appreciate the idea that, well, let's have a primary election where you have at least some geographical balance. However, that does not address cultural, economic, or racial balance. Once you go citywide, you get the biggest vote out of certain wards and precincts of the city.
I have to say I disagree with that, and that was the reasoning that was used in coming up with this plan by the committee, and for a large, I mean, that was a large part of the reason that they went with this plan. I think we keep throwing out the notion of at large incorrectly. We don't have a general election where the people in, say, the west side of Topeka get to decide who's the representative for the east side of Topeka. We get a general election where the entire city picks one of two who are picked by that district. And that's why I don't think that this case is particularly relevant to our discussion, because we're not doing this. This is not the system that we're basing on. I completely understand the inherent problems with the system that they have in Ferguson, but that is not what's being proposed.
And I understand what's being proposed in the charter ordinance. I'm saying that with all good intentions, it ends up creating an election system that is inherently balanced in the direction of parts of the city that register at a higher rate and vote at a higher rate. That inherent imbalance then is built into that general election that picks from the top two. I'm from Kenwood. It did come out in the testimony that, of course, I could say, 80% of us could vote for one person, and then the city at large say that has a higher voting rate would have more impact on who my representative is than I would. If you apply that citywide, then
But here's the problem with that. It does create a balance where, yes, districts that register and vote at a higher rate are going to have a greater say. Mm-hmm. It moves us more towards that direction. Now they're voting on representatives that are picked in that district, but the alternative that we have now is not a balanced system that gives more power to districts that don't vote, because they get the same number of representatives as districts that do vote.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure that
well,
that moving more towards the middle
yeah.
in that, and we're not reaching the middle, because they still get to choose the two. It's not a balanced,
Okay.
it's not a balanced way, but you're moving from one extreme, not from one extreme to another extreme, which would be the Ferguson example. You're moving from one extreme that we have currently closer to the middle, but you're not allowing districts that have higher voting and higher registered voting and higher turnout to decide who gets to represent those other districts. You're allowing them to participate along with those districts in the final two.
The final vote.
If I may, the one distinction I would make is that we don't represent voters, we represent citizens, and the districts that we have now currently are equal. So that the same number of citizens is represented in that body.
That's correct.
It shouldn't
It's
matter.
approximately 11%, plus or minus
The
2.5%.
the person that votes isn't afforded better government because they vote. Everybody should be afforded the same government whether they vote or not. That would be my argument. I'll let you finish.
I know the, and again, I do, I do know what you're getting at in terms of you feel like, gosh, City Hall is so fractious and whatever, nobody pays attention to the general issue. Sometimes I think the city council is not fair to itself. The long-range planning process that just got approved by the city council, that wasn't restricted to just, I care about my district. You just approved code enforcement changes that have been in the works for a long time. The code maintenance, that's a citywide issue that the city council came to agreement on. You just made changes to some of the classes that are protected by the Human Relations Commission. So I think the city council, without throwing away democracy, the city council has worked together a little more often than we hear from the bleachers is all they do is argue. I think you deserve more credit than some of those comments.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Orion, are you saying then basically the system is not broken, that you would not, and if you're saying that there should be some changes, do you have does the league have any suggestions as to
Okay.
how to do that?
Okay, I'm here today as I keep saying a civilian. I am on the board of the League of Women Voters, but I am here speaking. The league has, it's a matter of public record, the league has supported district elections, but I'm here speaking as a
Citizen.
civilian today.
Okay.
I would like to see things in a more positive direction about, are there things that the city and the election office can work together on to increase voter turnout throughout the city? Can get at some of the bedrock kinds of issues that we're talking about occurred in Ferguson? Are there things that your committee could come up with to propose ballot issues that would strengthen voter turnout? Are there, is that something that could be done rather than going to citywide elections it's the participation rate, and we also know that citywide elections are much more expensive. Big campaign contributors have a lot bigger role to say in citywide elections because they can spend $10,000 for mailers across the city. In a district election, you can do it on a shoestring if you can line up some volunteers, and I think all three of you have done that. So that keeps it closer to the people.
And a follow-up question then to that, would there be a comparison then to the fact that if you have a citywide election that you're campaigning in and it's costing you much more, your lineup of candidates may decrease because people know
Yes.
they're going to have to spend so much money
Yes.
citywide compared to
Yes.
a district-wide. And so your campaign accounts will have to be much more increased.
Exactly.
Yeah.
None of us, and nothing against hedge fund managers, but none of us are. Oh, yes, I did want to mention that. The Government Review Committee, you know, it's a matter of public record. There were a lot of really good things in that report. Some of the things that Mr. Moeller presented about governing body and clarifying some of the issues about what the mayor, how the mayor can vote on some issues and can't, some clarification. So, you know, I mean, I'm in no way criticizing. I'm just saying there's some analysis that was not discussed in that report.
Okay. Anything else?
Well, a follow-up to that. So would you have recommendations to those issues that maybe did not get mentioned, that we did not follow up on? As far as, and is there a way that we can continue this discussion?
Yeah. The president-elect of the League of Women Voters is here, and she is authorized
You're welcome to, anybody can
testify
come up and talk, yeah.
as a league, as our voice.
Right. Good afternoon. I'm Camille Noy, and I'm president-elect of the League of Women Voters, Topeka, Shawnee County. The league testified earlier before the city council that 8 of the 9 recommendations made by the Citizens Review Committee we supported. It was just the one issue that Orion has addressed that we had taken issue with.
Thank you.
Okay.
Were there any more questions for Ryan? Everybody's good? Okay. I'll just add a couple of thoughts that I have real quick, and then I'll open it up to let you two talk as well. My issue with this is that it seems to me to be a solution that's looking for a problem. I agree with Orion. I think that the city council tends to agree majority of the time. I've not seen any issue that's come before us in the 4 years that I've been here, or almost 4 years that I've been here, that every council member wasn't looking at the city at large as well. I think we may disagree about what's good for the city, and that's really where the distinction is that some folks want the city to work this way and some folks want the city to work that way. And I get that. Everybody's entitled to their opinions. But the reality is that we are entitled to our opinions. And if you don't like my ideas about the city, that's fine. I'm still entitled to be able to have those ideas. I think you're right, spot on with when you increase that number, you really start to shift things. And I would use Lawrence as an example because Lawrence is at large by district and there is 0 diversity on their city commission. So it is all white males. I don't want to see that happen in Topeka. I don't want to see that happen specifically because we have a majority of females on our city council right now, and I think that's great. I think that speaks to the diversity of our community. I'm not saying at-large voting would stop that from happening. I'm just pointing out the facts that I've seen. And the other side of this is that having been here for 4 years and spent some time involved with city things prior to that, I've heard this conversation repeated. This complaint, this concern comes up time and time again, and it tends to come up from very specific people, at least in my experience. Those specific people have felt slighted in their interest or for whatever reason would like to have a little bit more control in the city. I would like to have a little bit more control in the city too. But the reality is that we have a system that I feel works. And what I think Topeka has failed to do for its citizens is allow its system to work. We are constantly trying to change the tires on the car while the car is rolling down the street. And the reality is that we should be focused on driving the car. We had a commission form of government. We had a council form of government. We had a strong mayor form of, we keep doing this, hoping for a different result. And the argument that I would make is that we should just do a better job as elected officials and the citizens will get a better result. I know lots of people on the USD 501 school board. I couldn't tell you who my representative on that school board was because it's very confusing to me. We should not create hurdles for citizens to understand how they are governed. We should make it as simple as possible so that we encourage people to be engaged with that governance. When we start to create hurdles or make it tricky or hard to understand who represents me, who do I make that call to, people disengage and they're less involved. And that is not at all what I think any of us want to see happen. So I obviously I was opposed to it on the night of, when it came up at the city council. I remain opposed to any concept like this. I don't think this current system that we have is broken. I think it works just fine. I think it provides us with a level of democracy that benefits the citizens as best as possible. I think that we should continue to work to make the city better as it is right now. So with that, I'd let anybody else follow up.
Well, I would completely agree with that last sentiment, and so did the committee. The committee several times stated that our current process and that our current form of council government is working well, and that it isn't broken, but that this is an improvement. This isn't a radical change. You still get districts electing two that are then selected by the city. The district is still the determiner of the final two participants that are going to represent their district. As you said, that on the school board, you know several members of the school board, but you don't necessarily know who represents you. But the policies that the school board passes affect everybody in the school board. And it's the same thing on the city council. Every ordinance or resolution that we pass affects everybody in the city. So we represent the whole city. We're elected by our district representatives, but the laws that we make go into effect affect everybody in the city, not just our district. And while I do think that it is incredibly important to have diversity on the council, and I think we do have a pretty diverse council right now, and I think that's something to be proud of, there also is the notion that some measure could be given. And this is not a reversal of what we have now. This is a tweak to what we have now. And that tweak is to provide some level of accountability towards the city as a whole. I don't think that's a bad thing. The notion that was brought up earlier about balance, I think is important. We are entirely unbalanced now in that we do elect solely from districts, and I have no say over 8 of the 9 members of the council. If we move to a system where they were completely at large, we would be on the other extreme where I would have a vote for all 9 members of the council. What this is this is closer to the center. This is saying that district representatives, district members get to elect 2 people, nominate 2 people that then have to be accountable to the city as a whole. I'm frustrated by the notion that we're debating this on the extremes, because this is not an extreme position. We are not moving to either extreme. This is a modification of the system that we currently have, and I think it's an improvement on the system that we currently have. It wasn't my recommendation to the council or to the committee, but it was one that I thought they made good reasons for, and it's not perfect. It certainly isn't perfect, but I think it's an improvement on what we have, and it's an improvement that I think we should present to the voters. And that's ultimately what we're deciding is this something that we're willing to present to the voters? I'm comfortable presenting it to the voters. And that's why, after everybody gets a chance to talk, I'm going to move that we present this at least as a discussion item to the full council. But I think that's where we need to focus the discussion on this, is that this is what we're discussing, is presenting this to the voters as a whole to decide how they want to be represented, because they're the ones that ultimately have to live with the decisions that a 9-member council makes every day. Thank you.
I always have the last word in most discussions. it's not gonna be the last word here, though. I hate to disagree with you, Nathan, Councilman Schmidt, but this is a radical change. And the radical change would come from making it a citywide vote for each district, which means each candidate that is gonna run should be running citywide. And that is even facing that idea that you're gonna go to door citywide, what difference then does that make the council person versus the mayor? I mean, you have, and some cities, I think, do that. They have, citywide elections, and then the council votes on who's gonna be the mayor or the lead for that time. And we're not asking that in this. To me, it is a radical change. It would limit candidates that would apply to run, and we know that we don't have enough voter turnout. We don't have enough candidates that get interested, and this, to me, would be devastating to people thinking that they're gonna run for city council and then have to face a citywide election if they win from their district in the primary. So it is a radical change. And we do possibly need to review more at-large representation, but I don't think that our system is broken. I think we are working with 9, with a body of 10. Maybe that's quite a few, but it's not as many as Overland Park that has 15. So, I mean, I just don't think the system is broken. And I really think that we need to continue to study what other entities besides the league, there's other political interest in the city, and find out how we can possibly address this, and know that when the census comes about in 2022, which really isn't that far off, that we will, have the opportunity to review that again. So what I would like to see and follow, and I'll finish then with my last word, if we passed one of the 9 recommendations with the mayor voting, and this one is number 8, I would like for the city staff to look into the other 7 and see if there is some recommendations from the Citizens Review Committee that we could follow up with resolutions, ordinances, or whatever, because they all deserve study. So I would like to see our staff look at those other and bring some kind of report back to us that we could determine whether we need resolutions on or to further discuss. So.
Okay, great. Anything else?
Well, the idea of improving voter turnout, I think, is important, and I fail to see how making voting more important, because you're going to be going and voting on 4 or 5 council representatives every election, would reduce voter turnout. I think that would probably spur voter turnout, because you're voting every 2 years, and you're voting on the entire council rather than just one representative. And I think our voter turnout in municipal elections is pretty poor right now. But I'm going to make a motion to submit this proposal to the full council.
Is there a second for that motion? Motion dies for a lack of a second. Is there any other motion? Any other motion? All right, seeing none, we'll move on to the next agenda item, which is any other items before the committee. Are there any other items to come before this committee? Anything? Anybody? Everybody have a good Christmas? Nice holiday? All right. Then we will go ahead and declare this meeting over and adjourn. Thank you.
Thank you.